Welcome back to the channel. I'm joined again by Scott Wallner. This is our third episode together. It's a record on this channel, which is very young, but still worth something. Today, we will pick up where we left off. We spoke about fences and Twoness, I guess, polarities, and Scott wants to evolve our conversation, I guess, into talking about deep triads, but what are you saying? What are you saying?
No, you're laying it out perfectly. I love that you said evolve the conversation from Twoness to Threeness.
Yeah, but I was gonna say that you might have something to say about the Tunis as well still. And then there's a book that Scott recommended to me about the Enneagram. Probably some people familiar. This is quite an enigmatic thing, which I have not really articulated my thoughts on yet. I've read about half the book. It's very interesting the way it like goes over the different personalities, but we'll see if we can get to that at all. And we'll just get started where we left off with defenses. So take it away, Scott.
Thanks. No, well, as we were just saying before this, as we were sort of prepping for our intro, and I just want to pick up on a little joke for ourselves. You know, you were saying there's no way to summarize like what we're going into. We
Yeah.
just enter into it. And that's like just like entering into a fractal. I don't know if you've ever watched sort of those zooming into fractal
Oh,
videos.
absolutely.
Yeah, and so that's kind of the way it is, right? It's just like you have to make your choice of where you enter in, and you
Mm-hmm.
don't get to choose everything all at once, and then you just keep searching deeper and deeper. Um, and it's a really unique journey to get to whatever endpoint you get to, and sometimes you can't really replicate that either.
I think that's
Um,
reality. I
yeah,
really think
exactly.
so. Because the people on those types of mystical experiences, they a lot of time that's the visual they get as well. And to me, that's a bit of a sign that it's something reflecting reality. But yeah, go on.
I'm with you completely. And some other things that I've heard recently, and actually Karen has brought this up a couple of times, is the fact that like every particle in the universe is unique. This is based on another sort of physicist research or sort of findings, but yeah, that fits into my metaphysic or my ontology of the sort of continuous flow of time and context. And so, yes, just by the nature of the way things unfold and grow in a sort of fractal way, that it's like every path you're going down is unique in a sense. But maybe we should. I'm going to try to go from picking up from last time, like you said. Um, Maybe just say a little bit about the steep fences,
Yeah,
or deep trenches, whatever we want, right? Either way works. Um, and then evolving into threeness.
sounds good.
And and if I'm able, maybe we can go in our final part of the conversation, if we get there, into the Enneagram, which what number is important in the Enneagram?
9?
9. Yeah, definitely. And so, could we evolve all the way to 9?
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
Right. So there's a path of conversations to get there. And if you go a little bit deeper, Lucas, you'll find that the what you think of as 9 in the Enneagram could actually be 27, or 27 times 2, or 27 times 2 times 9 sort of categorizations.
Is
So
that
there's
relating to the subtypes or
exactly.
okay. Yeah.
So there's subtypes. Some people also think of wings. Then there's also paths of integration and disintegration. So there's a sort of movement and direction involved. And so I would love to open that up with you, even if we just do that personally some other time.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And so the Twoness, the steep fence, I was saying, like, I thought a lot about it after I talked to you about it. And I was just noticing that there are a lot of other concepts out there that can sort of be matched with this steep fence idea. And the steep fence idea was you have a decision, or you have a theory, or you have a feeling or belief, and you sort of have to create two choices for yourself. And that's a dichotomy. It's a little bit of an arbitrary choice sometimes. Maybe it's clear between two choices, but there's two positions to take. And then there's this special position up on top of the fence where you get to sit on the fence and sort of see both. And so that's a sort of twoness. And some of the other concepts that go along with that is, as you mentioned, like a polarity, right? Where, well, I guess what's interesting is there's a sort of oneness to the polarity, or there's a sort of oneness even to our steep fence imagery, right? It's like it's one fence, but it creates two sides.
Yeah.
The polarity of a magnet, right? It's a single magnet, but it has this twoness of polarity. And so I guess if we're able to move sort of de-evolve down to zero, right, through 2 and 1 and down to 0, and then back up where we maybe want to go today, which is into the threeness category. A way that I'm hoping to figure out more clearly just in my own mind is how do we get from zeroness or oneness into 2, into 3, and so on, and continue evolving in these sort of patterns and relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So what we find is like the polarity comes out of something that is sort of one dimensional, right? And then the threeness is almost like this, I guess, that sitting on the fence position, where there are at first 2 sides to the fence that you could be on, but there is a third, right, which sort of makes this triangulation, this extra perspective on the 2. And when you add a third, now you get something really interesting. In geometry, you get a polygon, right, a triangle, an enclosed shape. And when you get an enclosed shape, you get an inside and an outside, and you get a boundary. And so there's something that fundamentally just sort of pops out when you move or you evolve from 2 to 3, right? So yeah, I want to give you some space to jump in before I keep just
No, it's
fractal.
amazing, amazing. I'm taking it in because I was listening to a talk before, and they spoke about listening. And for me, when I listen, I really don't have a set uh, thing that I want to blurt out. Like I'm really just listening and integrating what you are saying, and I'm visualizing along with it. So you're not occupying too much space or anything. I think you're still just unfolding your your ideas. So keep going, please.
Well, thank you. That is like that's a gift that you have, I think, and so utilize that, because
Thanks.
I struggle with that. I feel like so much of my inner life, I'm just going to share with you, my friend. So much of my inner life is waiting to jump in on someone.
No, but that's why I like when I had the first conversation with you, I felt that it was going to be a long ride for sure because there's a lot to unfold, to use your metaphor from before. And for me,
Sure.
I'm just taking in, like I'm integrating, and then afterwards I have the critical thoughts. But right now, I'm just like I'm seeing, I'm seeing all that's there. So
Okay.
yeah,
Well, I can't help. Former teacher, you got to check on your
yeah,
student. Are
no,
they sitting
absolutely,
there and listening? Yeah, no, I'm just kidding.
no,
You're
that's
not
it.
you're not my student, and I'm not the teacher here.
I know.
So okay, so well, let me ask you this then. Let's just go into some really interesting stuff that other people have said, not me. Have you heard of something called the 3-body problem?
I'm really not sure. Maybe because it sounds very much like the mind body problem, and then,
Mm.
but
So
I
yeah,
don't know. So please tell me more.
the fact that it's a problem is, I guess, in the way that it's problematic,
Mm,
in that we have we lack good, clear solutions. So it remains a problem. And the problem is, I guess, in the most simplified way, is sort of there are limits to what we can know about systems that involve 3 entities or 3 bodies or 3 quantities. So when you look at sort of the complex dynamics of systems, we can not we, I'm saying we as
yeah,
in
yeah.
the broader field of mathematics
Sorry.
science. Not me and you, probably. I could maybe grit through some of the mathematics and computation myself, or sort of read it like I can read music poorly.
Mm-hmm.
But there are sort of paradoxical limits, I guess, to what we can know just when we increase from like one entity or one body to two to three. And there's this massive leap in sort of complexity when you move from two to three.
In a
And so,
mathematical sense.
in a mathematical
So
sense,
it's like it's leaking in terms of how accurate the picture is of it. Would that
sure,
be?
but not, but maybe not even so much how accurate, just like we can't be accurate.
Okay.
So there's actual limits. Like if you might be able to imagine trying to account for the movements and relative movements of sort of three stars orbiting each other.
Yeah.
Right? Or just two stars orbiting each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot that we can sort of describe mathematically when it's two stars. And you would think, because we have all of that complex mathematics, that there's just some logical next step to take account of a third body. But for some reason, there is just an extra level of complexity when you move on to three.
Why do you think that is?
Why do I think that is?
Yeah.
Well, one interesting thing, this might not be why, but
Mm-hmm.
this seems related, is kind of what I mentioned about, well, what's the difference between a line and a triangle, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's just a massive change in dimensionality, right? It's literally like a higher dimensionality in the mathematics, and we can sort of think of also just dimensions of sort of variables or something like that. Like again, a line has two dimensions, or one dimension, sorry, with two directions, one dimensional line, and then a shape that takes up, is flat on the plane, has two dimensions, right? We can move
Yeah,
in
I
the X
understand.
direction or in the Y direction. And so that extra dimension is literally like a new place for existence to happen.
Could you
You
not
know,
have that with two lines? No, not
so
straight.
right. So you two lines exactly, but they would have to intersect, and there would have to be a
Yeah,
relation between those two lines to sort of realize that extra dimension.
I see.
Each line in and of itself is only that one dimensional polarity, I guess. But when you bring them into a higher system, right? Imagine that you live on the line, right? The line all over there, or the line crossing over you, you don't have any access to that. This is
Yeah,
the sort of thought experiment of the book and story Flatland,
yeah,
if you've ever heard of
yeah, yeah,
that
I'm
story.
familiar.
Yeah, it's such a cool little book. You could read it in an afternoon because you do this like crazy speed reading. But yeah, it's like from the perspective of these beings that live in one-dimensional, two-dimensional, three-dimensional spaces.
Yeah,
And yeah, I guess the other point then is I'm constantly trying to move between the geometry and the math, and then things like concepts, and even concepts that have a sort of spiritual nature or some sort of human level meaning, right? How do I jump from, I think we were just barely talking before, and this is where we said, well, we just got to just start,
yeah,
is there are relationships between the features of geometry that can be sort of mapped onto concepts, in my opinion.
yeah.
And it's not just my opinion. I could maybe cite some other sources that are thinking along those lines. But yeah, what does the angular relationship between concepts mean? How can we usefully bring in things like trigonometry proofs and what we know about side lengths and angles in triangles? How can we bring that into conceptual relationships that also have three aspects?
Yeah.
So this is where I ultimately want to go with the threeness, is not like this really interesting mathematics that pops out or the geometry that is there for us. But what deep triads are meaningful, right? What relationships of three concepts specifically are really meaningful?
Yeah.
And before maybe we go into those, I just want to say three is not extra special. It's just special in that it's three and not two or four, because we could easily say, let's choose the number four and let's find meaningful relationships of concepts that are categorized by some fourness, right? And there's an interesting symmetry and relationship of things in fours that is different than threes and different than twos.
Yeah.
And so to me, it would be nice. I have this like maybe like this grand project that other people will have to do for me, I guess, where it's like, let's create categories of at least ones, twos, threes, and fours, where we put together these groups of four concepts that seem to really work well together. And then we have multiple groups of four concepts or multiple instances of three concepts that work together or twos, and try to come up with some like principles of all of the categories of four that we have, or all of the categories of three that we have. And one reason I think this is an important thing to do is that there are already multiple instances which have different origins that come to these same groupings. Okay, right? Like there are concepts of three in many spiritual, religious, esoteric traditions, right? They might not be the exact same three concepts, but nonetheless, they're grouped in three. Mm. And so what can we say about all groups of three concepts that are meaningful, right?
Yeah. A lot of it is landing for me. Like I see how it scales up and down for sure. And I'm also starting to understand why geometry and mathematics in general have been so revered, maybe by the Platonic tradition, among others, because I really see how it teaches you so much about reality at large, because reality is self-similar and fractal in nature. So that's really, yeah, it's really starting to starting to land. So please continue.
That's great. Yeah, exactly. When you sort of get this, you get the there's a translation. There's a translation between geometry and concepts,
That's
in
it.
my opinion.
Yep.
I don't have that translation complete, but it seems that it is there. I want to just plug a book and an idea that honestly probably fed me this, or it fulfilled a place that I was wondering about.
Yep.
And just hearing it put so nicely, by these great thinkers, it sort of just filled that place that I was waiting to like get confirmation.
Exactly.
And so Arthur Young. Arthur M. Young. He was a philosopher, but he was also an engineer. He basically like invented the modern helicopter.
Wow.
Yeah, but also has like a system for reality. So in addition to like being a legitimate inventor and engineer, he wrote two books that are really great, is The Reflexive Universe and then The Geometry of Meaning, right? So there you go. The Geometry of Meaning, right? That's what I've been biting off of. And so I should, I guess, just, cite it here, even though anything I say now is not a direct citation. It's just all, my own weird twist.
That's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah. So I don't have to worry about any, copyright infringements or anything.
Good.
But, yeah. So, but other people, so Lucas, there's so many, I mean, you're aware of, sorry, it's so exciting.
Good.
It's so exciting because, I mean, think about Wolfgang Smith, right? Yeah. And the circle and the point and the intermediary, right? there's geometry that goes along with those relationships. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the geometry itself makes sense in terms of how he speaks about those things. Joseph Campbell had the hero's journey, right? Another big one that seems to ring true for lots of human beings, right? And sort of ring true in the way that we assess what we are too. So it's both like very real to you and it's sort of meta real as well. And that's a cyclical journey, right? Jung had a circle and a center and below the surface and above the surface and inside and outside and ego and right. And there's geometry there. Why is there geometry? Well, do you have an idea?
I think it's foundational to, like I said, to reality. So it makes sense for us to make the most sense when we use geometry, because geometry in many ways is perfect. And I think that geometrical bodies could be conceptualized as being in the realm that is without time for sure, and perhaps without space, but I haven't quite figured it out yet. But I feel it might be.
Very interesting place to go. Very interesting.
By
Well,
the way, do you know? Sorry, go ahead.
You brought up a lot that I want to like pick at,
Yeah, go ahead.
Or pick up instead. There's what you said about being perfect, right?
Mm-hmm.
This perfect or maybe platonic place of like ideas or the ideas of geometry, right? I think it's again pointing at the fact that there is a different space, there is a different dimension to go to than what we interact with, because we don't see any perfect triangles anywhere, we don't see any perfect circles anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few reasons for that. One, it's likely that they don't exist, because that sort of perfectness just maybe can't happen for some reason, like entropy or whatever the universe is doing. And then there's also the fact that how would we know? We can't measure to infinite precision, and so we can never even verify that the circle is perfect.
Yeah. Yeah,
Because we would
exactly.
have to measure infinitely and the computation would never end to sort of give us the result and the verification. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
it is in fact a perfect circle, right? As you zoom in closer and closer on the surface of the circle, maybe you find some anomaly. Or as you try to measure the angle of triangles more and more accurately, you never reach the infinite precision. You're just sort of adding decimal points, right? Or significant figures onto the end of it if you'd like. And there really doesn't seem to be a limit to that. Well, physics might have something to say about that with Planck length and sort of least action principles. We don't need to go there, but if there's any physics people out there watching and they're screaming at me like, what about the Planck length? It's like, I know about the Planck length, but I don't want to go there. Yeah, it's interesting to think about where do they fit into time and space, or not in time and not in space.
Well, actually,
Yep.
you just said that if they are perfect, if geometry is perfect and perfection doesn't exist on this plane of existence, then perhaps they are beyond space just for that reason, because space by definition does not have perfection.
That's right. I think I agree with you in the fact that like when we think of space, it's like we're thinking about the stuff that we move through out here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree. There's maybe some at the fundamental level why anything exists at all is sort of like some fundamental, in my mind, it's some fundamental asymmetry that happened at some point or imperfection. And then that is sort of a seed to a crystal of, like asymmetry.
Yeah.
If you think about chemistry, it's like some of these things that like requires like a little dose, a little catalyst, a little something else, a seed. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And that little breaking of the order that's in that chemical solution or something, right? Where it's perfect, it's saturated, it's not doing anything, it's homeostatic. And then a little bit of asymmetry comes and just knocks it off its homeostatic position, and then boom, lots sort of just
Yeah.
fall out. It just cascades out of that.
Yeah.
And maybe our universe is like that, and we're seeing like this very, very branched out edge of what has cascaded before. And right. So the other thing about space, if we are thinking geometrically in space, you don't really have a good sense. Like imagine yourself out in a vast 3-dimensional space, and you see a triangle like floating out in front of you.
Yeah.
If you have no reference points for that triangle, you really have no way of knowing where the triangle is, how big it is, or what orientation it's in. If
Mm-hmm.
you're in a sort of like human vision model of things and the way that we see the world. So what I mean by that is if you don't have any reference points or you don't have any like real contact with the thing, what looks like a really small triangle could just be a really huge triangle that's far away from you. Right?
Yeah, makes sense.
Or what looks like a really squashed, thin triangle might just be a triangle that's sort of rotated away from you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where that sort of perspective makes it map onto your vision as like squashed and skinny, where you aren't able to have a sort of context for how far back it's going into your 3-dimensional space, right?
Yeah.
Again, there's this disconnect between something 2-dimensional, like a flat triangle. Even though we know we're simplifying, like if it's a flat triangle, it really has 3 dimensions. So it's kind
Mm-hmm.
of and yeah, that sort of cheating. Oh gosh, dude, my tangents are just
It's
wild.
amazing.
My tangents are so wild. Amazing. I don't know. I don't know.
I
I
like
think
it.
you're being too nice.
Oh, really? I think it's I think it exemplifies your thinking, and your thinking wouldn't be your thinking without it. Like you wouldn't be a person with all these thoughts without it. And that's why it's one of the reasons why you're valuable.
Well, thank you. I feel like I need help. And so maybe this is where people can help me and you can help me is how do I go off on a tangent, but somehow circle back to like make a larger connection? That's something that I worry about in my own thinking is that I branch so far sometimes and just go on tangents. I lose the central thread. I lose what I wanted to maybe think about.
Yeah, I understand.
Or I'm not sort of bending it back. You know, I'm losing that context
No,
again.
it's all good. Maybe it's my duty. So maybe I should speak for geometry's sake right now and say that because this is what I was thinking about while you were speaking, that I do think it's true that the human observer can't see like perfection or measure it at all. But
Mm.
what we see does stem from perfection, let's say. So it's an expression of the geometrical reality. And so in that sense, the reality is here, but it will never be perfectly expressed. But by virtue of its expression everywhere throughout nature, with certain clear rules, let's say, um, like what makes a tree type of conversation, it is there, but it must be on a higher plane through what Wolfgang would call like vertical causation. It's
Right.
it's there.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And well, here's what I wonder about, and maybe this is just an ultimate mystery,
Right.
is whether that perfection, that dimension of perfection, which maybe I also like to relate sort of the Platonic forms to Jung's archetypes. To me, that's a sort of, again, a bridge between the
Okay, that's
geometry
interesting.
and
Yeah.
the concepts, right? You think of like a particular archetype as a geometric shape, it's a pattern.
Oh
There's
wow.
relationships between the features of the archetype.
Hmm.
It has a character to it, and it has symmetries. It has number, something about number and pattern in there. And maybe the archetypes again are like, yeah, nobody is the embodiment of an archetype. Nobody is one
Yes,
archetype,
yes, yes.
right?
Actually, because sometimes we call this So, for example, the tree that you see over here, so I'm seeing it, you're not seeing it actually, but the tree that's in front of me right now, it's an expression of that archetype. And that's the word we sometimes use when we describe these geometrical realities. So it actually works perfectly the way you say it. It's true.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that Jung, maybe at some point he answered a question directly about this type of connection. I think that I heard this from a Bernardo Kastrup interview at some point, where he was mentioning that Jung sort of directly he addressed that issue and was sort of, I guess I'll just say, in some agreement that there's a conceptual bridge to be had there. So Jung himself would
Yeah.
sort of think about that. Another person that I believe would fall into that category is like Rupert Sheldrake with morphic resonance, right? And that there are these sort of like patterns of experience and patterns of habit, and there's
Mhm.
patterns of biology. And but again, some of the biology is actually geometry, right? Like the mechanisms that are in our body, cellular structures and genetic structures and things like that, do rely on angle and proximity and
Yeah.
length, size, and the geometry of, neurotransmitters matter for what occurs.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to see that there's this conceptual perfect geometry, and there's also the very real geometry, and then there's also the archetypes, and there's the very real sort of imperfect enaction of archetypes, right? Or a
Yeah.
blending synthesis of archetypes, or it's an evolution of archetypes, because I think we're already leading ourselves back to the Enneagram. I'm just saying that
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Perfect.
see it driving along with us, right?
Amazing.
Um, and so yeah, we're on we're on the Autobahn right now, and I see some new things coming up, and like we're gonna let Enneagrams like come on in, like right, right near the
Sounds
end.
good. Nine
Um,
lanes.
but yeah, it wouldn't make sense to even think about an archetype existing, because the archetype itself, like the only context for the archetype is in the sort of systematic ordering of the archetypes. It's when placed in a different context, it has to have a different meaning.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
It sort of has to be applied.
Yeah.
It has to be enacted. And because it does that in this reality place, there's that sort of that seed of imperfection, right? There's that crystal seed that allows for things.
Do
So
you think that the archetypes are dependent on their expressions for their existence in our existence? Like let's say, like for example, if there were no trees, if trees didn't exist, would the archetype still exist of the tree?
mm, this is a great question. It's like, do the archetypes have their own standalone existence?
Yeah, because I feel it's almost similar to ideas in a sense, where last week
Yes.
we discussed this, like what is the difference between an idea recorded versus not recorded? And perhaps archetypes work similarly.
My gut tells me that
Yeah.
that except I'm very willing to leave open a dimension that we're not aware of.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Um, and it doesn't have to even be in some weird conception of what a dimension is. Maybe it's just another space, right? Another
Yeah,
category,
yeah, of course, of course. I
another
understand.
substance, another, whatever sort of way you want to label some otherness. Um, I'm very willing to leave that open for things that we just can't access
Yeah.
directly. And we are limited in the way that we access things.
Mm.
Um, and so it might only be through some sort of secondhand or like trickle down access that we can conceptualize them. So it feels like to me that they don't exist in this same place. So in that sense, they aren't here. They aren't real in the same way. They are real in the sense that I can think about them, and I will just be agnostic about whether they have their
Okay.
own existence beyond.
Can I ask you if you've ever experienced something from a different realm, would you say?
I've had archetypal dreams,
Yeah.
so some very vivid ones, um, where the symbology, but it's not always just symbols like painted on the wall. It's figures, it's
Yeah.
characters, it's situations where, you know, lions being chained to a wall in my dream have some symbolic representation,
Yeah.
right? I'm not seeing an icon, but I'm seeing a full life symbol that, and recognizing it as such. Now, maybe that's because I was fortunate to read about some of those symbols before. Maybe that inspired my dream. The dream felt very different. There was a connection to a character who, um, maybe some would say was like the Empress of the Lions or something, that came in and had a sort of visitor. I sensed them as a sort of, they came into my dream, like
Yeah.
it was intentional or something. That's the way that it felt in my dreaming state.
Yeah.
And seeing a certain face and a certain pattern, that
Mm-hmm.
when I went back and woke up and I was like, this was something different. And I went to my Joseph Campbell books actually, and I was like looking through, and I'm seeing the same lions, I'm seeing the same woman, I'm seeing the depiction of the face of the sun, and so how does that happen? Right, there's some, and maybe this is Wolfgang has like a system for this where there's causation between the levels, and
Yeah.
maybe I was on one end of that causation in that case, right, where the higher level, the archetypes, they came down. Maybe they're angels, maybe angels is a good way. Angels
Yeah, I
and
was
demons,
gonna say.
they come down, like, or maybe the gods, like from Greek times. It's uh I wonder. I I wonder about how that happens and how much of it is me. Even in our
Well,
last one.
one of the reasons I'm persuaded by it being like semi-objective in a sense is that people have very similar experiences, like similar archetypal experiences in their dreams, and then especially thinking about psychedelic experiences, they're so similar in terms of what people experience. It's almost like I've heard that people are doing studies, I don't know if it's true, where they put people on like a very slow drip of DMT to like map the realm.
Yep.
And just this language alone is already alluding to this idea that there's actually something to map, and it's not just everyone's subjective fantasies or whatever. So I'm leaning toward that side for sure. Um,
Mm,
yeah.
yeah, agreed. Yeah, creating maps is an interesting thing to consider. Uh,
Yeah, creating maps on this earthly existence is one thing, and then creating maps of another realm. Like,
Sounds a lot like physics.
yeah, kind of really, because it feels like even when we speak about geometry, what we're doing is we're forming images in our head. I think at least I am, and you are as well. And still, those are images. Like we almost forget we're not actually contacting the geometrical reality. We're still purposefully deceiving ourselves that we are actually dealing with perfect bodies. But if those perfect bodies didn't exist, I don't think we could even imagine them collectively like this, like the way we do.
Hmm. Yeah, that is a deep question.
But I
It's
know, yeah.
like, consider both cases. Consider the case where they do exist out there beyond us, and consider the case where they don't exist out there beyond us,
Hmm.
and see if you can get to the same point, which is we have some experience of them,
Yeah,
right?
no, absolutely.
Are both possible? I haven't gone through that. It seems obvious. It seems more clear as to how to get from they do exist out there and we experience them sort of down here in here.
Hmm.
Um, that seems quite easy to make that connection. it's harder, but I'm not sure if it's impossible to go from they don't exist out there somewhere else and we experience them in here.
Well, I think
Um,
maybe John Vervaeke speaks about transactivity. And I think what I want to speak about is that we are stuck kind of in a subject object duality as well, which is making this question so difficult for us because this is the way we like to map reality. Whereas, like you say, you can leave open different options and still it can make sense. I think that for me would be at least a solution that keeps keeps things open because the world is not just subjects and objects and yeah. So that's what I say.
how many how many things is it? Right?
Um,
If
11.
it's
No,
not,
I don't know.
if it's not two, maybe do we need a third? Do we need a fourth?
I
Is
think
it
playing
seven?
around with that helps.
Exact. Yes, I agree.
But do
I
you
agree.
know like maps? Like think about maps of like places.
Mhm.
Sometimes a certain map is useful, and sometimes another one is useful that has different metrics and different statistics. Like that. That's why I think you can try different ones because they're all just different, portals into.
Yes. To
Yeah.
me, I think of those as sort of layers.
Hmm.
And so then we can sort of navigate the depth, right?
Exactly.
And to me, I think that there's probably also a directionality or a hierarchy to that depth because depth sort of implies that by necessity.
Yeah.
Um, right. If we to create depth, you have to sort of like be in different positions
Hmm.
and there has to be some sort of directionality to it. Or you could sort of impose some directionality. I guess you could also easily impose the opposite directionality as
Yeah.
well. But this is something that I think is critical for people to, I don't know, maybe practice, right? Create an ecology of practice,
Yeah.
like Vervaeke says, for
Hmm.
this navigation of depth, right? How do I how do I allow myself access to more layers of depth? There are probably many on any given maybe event in your life that you're trying to assess, decision that you're trying to make,
Yeah.
right? Way that you're trying to be. um, and so, how do you allow for more layers that are different, distinct mappings?
Yeah.
And how do you sort of navigate through those?
No, absolutely. It makes me also think of narrative in a sense where you can use different narratives to understand reality, and different narratives serve different functions. And yeah, it's the same with your deep fences, or sorry, steep fences, deep trenches uh, idea, where yes, you can go down on the one side and you can go down on the other side, and the insights will be different. So yeah, there's value in the different stories, if I may use my Petersonian.
Yeah, absolutely. And right, maybe one of these sets of layers is the one, two, three, four, five, six, sevenness of
Mm,
things.
mm.
And that's kind of what I feel like I'm in full agreement with you that there are different stories and narratives that are useful. And to me, for a human, maybe the story is potentially the most useful thing that we can get to.
Yeah.
Uh, but we can also like maybe start with geometry and get to a story.
Yes.
Um,
Do you know
and
Eric Weinstein?
yeah, well, no, I don't know him personally, but
He's like, I think, sometimes he goes on Joe Rogan and he tries to explain something about geometry and math and physics, and usually he loses Joe like this.
yeah.
And that's because what he wants, he doesn't want a story, he wants mathematics.
Mm,
So you'll see him try to basically like create some sort of grand narrative. Like he has this, he's working on this theory of everything. I'm forgetting the name, but his show is named The Portal. I don't know. But he loses people so quickly because the only people that will understand are some mathematicians.
mhm.
So it reminds me of that because those are both ways to understand reality. But like you say, perhaps story works best for us, and perhaps that is why that will be most useful. perhaps that is why that has been passed on throughout the generations as well.
Absolutely. And maybe I mean most useful in a sense of like most useful to most people most of the time.
Yeah, that's a nice
Because
one.
it's not most useful when we want to engineer something,
Oh,
right? It's not most useful maybe when we want to like have an organization, right?
yeah,
Or a company or something like that. Hold on just a sec.
yeah. I'll pause
I
it.
gotta I gotta jump out and
Yeah,
try and
take
kid real quick.
take your time.